Where exactly do you find that line between efficiency and inefficiency in today's asset classes?
Well, I described my history, which was high yield bonds in 78, distressed debt in 88, emerging markets in 98. So the key is that there were things people would do and things people wouldn't do. There were markets that people didn't understand, didn't have full data on. Maybe there wasn't any performance history. The markets were not fully, they didn't have the infrastructure and the institutions. And of course, there were biases, as I described. There were people who said, no, it's, Moody's, venerable credit rating institution. If you took down the 1978 edition of the Moody's manual off your shelf, and you looked up the definition of a B-rated bond, it said, fails to possess the characteristics of a desirable investment. In other words, you cannot prudently invest in a B-rated bond. That's a bias. And if there's an asset and 99% of people will not buy it at any price, then it makes sense that the people who will buy it might get a bargain. So these things, not knowing about it, not understanding about it, not being willing to buy it, not thinking it's a professional or fiduciary, these are the kinds of things that create inefficiency, what I call structural inefficiency. Where are they today? Almost negligible. Today, believe me, 40, 50 years ago, for those of you who were not practicing this profession then, the world was a stupid place. Nobody knew anything. I mean, there was all this data, and maybe the data existed, or maybe it didn't exist, but if it existed, maybe it was over there, and maybe you were over there, and you had no idea where it was, or how to get it, or the people who had it wouldn't give it to you. And today, everybody knows everything. You're out to dinner with your date or your spouse, and you have an argument about when a certain movie came out, you Google it, you find out. There's no such thing anymore as not knowing anything. And so, if today, everybody knows about every asset class, has data on it, and feels they understand it and feels comfortable with it, then where are you going to find structural inefficiencies? And the answer is, it's tough. It's really tough. I wrote a memo in January of 14 called Getting Lucky. And I talked about a process I call efficientization, which is, if inefficiency is really, to sum it up and oversimplify it, inefficiency is the result of ignorance. And today there's much less ignorance. So markets become more efficient over time, and I believe most markets have become more efficient over time. And it's very hard to find anything that is about which there is ignorance. And by the way, back in 1978, people would say to me, well, young man, and I was a young man at the time, I'm sure you can make a lot of money doing that, but it wouldn't be proper. It wouldn't be fiduciary. Now, look around this room. Today, anybody will do anything to make a buck. So that bias does not exist. And that's the bias that gave people like me opportunity 40 years ago. We talk about efficient markets. The economy talks about perfect markets. Economists talk about it. And there are certain criteria for perfect markets, which are obviously the same. And one is knowledge, one is objectivity, and one is the willingness to substitute. So in other words, oil and gas will be priced in a standard relationship to each other as long as everybody is willing and able to go from oil to gas and gas to oil. They will equilibrate their prices. That's what efficient markets do. And today, people are willing to invest in any market. So it's really hard to think of where you're going to get a free lunch. However, I do go on in the memo to say that while structural inefficiency is hard to locate, from time to time we get cyclical inefficiency, which is to say from time to time people lose their objectivity and they value assets too low, in which case we can get bargains if we resist the error of their psychology. So I think it's really hard to find structural inefficiency today. From time to time, we find cyclical inefficiency. And I can't tell you where the dividing line is, and it's never the same.